After my daughter said, "Dad, you can't handle your finances anymore. We're taking over," my lawyer begged me to fight back. I said, "Give her everything she wants." Everyone thought I'd lost my mind. At the final hearing, I signed the papers. Amanda smiled until her lawyer's face went white when he read one sentence. "I'm Gregory Pearson, 62 years old, and let me tell you how my own daughter tried to rob me blind, and how my late wife Linda got the last laugh from beyond the grave." The funeral flowers for Linda were barely wilted when Amanda decided to destroy me. I was sitting in my home office on Maple Street in Sacramento, the same room where Linda and I had planned our retirement for 30 years. The office sat at the front of our two-story colonial, with tall windows that looked out onto the oak trees we'd planted when Amanda was just a toddler. Same oak desk where we'd figured out college funds and mortgage payments. Same leather chair where I'd reviewed engineering blueprints for decades. Now I was supposed to hand over everything to the daughter we'd sacrificed for. The office walls were lined with my engineering awards and Linda's teaching certificates, photos of family vacations, Amanda's graduation from UC Davis, our 25th anniversary trip to Europe. Normal family stuff that normal families cherish, but apparently none of that mattered anymore. Amanda walked in like she owned the place, which apparently she thought she did. At 33, she had that corporate swagger down pat sharp charcoal suit from Nordstrom designer handbag that cost more than my monthly utilities. Confidence that came from climbing the marketing ladder at some tech company downtown. Her auburn hair was pulled back in that severe bun she wore to important meetings, and her heels clicked against the hardwood floors like a countdown timer. Her husband Troy followed behind her like a well-dressed shadow, all smiles and handshakes. Troy Bennett, 36 years old, always perfectly groomed, always had the right thing to say at the right moment. He'd been selling himself as a financial advisor since the day he married my daughter, but I never quite understood what he actually advised people about. "Dad," Amanda said, settling into Linda's favorite reading chair without asking. The burgundy wingback chair where my wife had spent countless evenings grading papers and reading mystery novels. Seeing Amanda in that chair felt like a violation somehow. "We need to talk about your situation." My situation. Like I was some charity case instead of the man who'd raised her after her mother got sick, who'd worked double shifts to pay for her college, who'd walked her down the aisle at her wedding just 2 years ago. The afternoon light was streaming through those front windows, casting long shadows across the Persian rug Linda had picked out at an estate sale in Folsom, the same rug where Amanda used to play with her dolls when she was 6 years old, making up elaborate stories about princesses and kingdoms. Now she was making up stories about my incompetence. What kind of situation, I asked, though I already didn't like where this was heading. Troy cleared his throat and adjusted his silk tie. He always did that before delivering bad news, like he was warming up his vocal cords for a performance. "Greg, we're concerned about your ability to manage your finances effectively. Since Linda's passing, you've seemed confused about certain matters." Confused. I'd been an engineer for 35 years at the State Department of Transportation, managed million-dollar infrastructure projects, supervised teams of 20 people, designed bridges and highway systems that thousands of Californians drove on every day. But suddenly I was too confused to balance a checkbook. Amanda leaned forward with that fake concern she'd perfected in corporate meetings. The same expression she probably used when she had to fire someone or deliver bad quarterly results. "Dad, we love you. That's why we want to help." Troy's a financial advisor. He knows how to handle these things properly. Handle what things? Linda and I had been careful with money our whole lives. We'd bought this house in 1995 for $180,000 when interest rates were brutal but manageable. We'd saved every penny, invested smartly in index funds and blue chip stocks, owned our house outright after making extra payments for 15 years. Our investment account had grown steadily, even through the 2008 crash and the pandemic volatility. But I kept my mouth shut and let them talk. "We've been reviewing your accounts," Troy continued, pulling out an iPad and scrolling through what looked like financial spreadsheets. "And frankly, there are some irregularities that concern us." "What kind of irregularities?" Amanda pulled out a folder thick enough to choke a horse. Manila-colored, the kind lawyers use when they want to intimidate people with paperwork. "Dad, you've got assets scattered everywhere. Multiple accounts, investments we can't track, business interests that don't make sense. It's a mess. A mess." 30 years of careful financial planning, of reading investment magazines and consulting with our accountant every April was apparently a mess to these two. I glanced at the engineering degree hanging on the wall behind them, California State University, Sacramento, class of 1983. 40 years ago, I'd graduated summa cum laude with a degree in civil engineering, but somehow I was too stupid to manage money. "We think it would be best if we consolidated everything," Troy said, his voice taking on that smooth, professional tone he used when he was trying to sell something. "Streamline your holdings. Make sure you're protected from what? From having money? From making my own decisions?" From living in the house I'd paid off with my own sweat, the irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a man who'd spent decades building things that lasted: bridges, overpasses, infrastructure that would serve Northern California for generations. But my own daughter thought I couldn't handle a savings account. Amanda opened the folder and spread papers across Linda's antique coffee table. The same table where we'd played Monopoly when Amanda was 12, where she'd done her homework while Linda graded papers at the other end. Now it was covered with legal documents designed to separate me from everything Linda and I had built together. "We've had our attorney draw up some documents," Amanda said, her voice taking on that patient tone you use with children or people you think are losing their minds. "Nothing fancy, just a power of attorney so we can help manage things, and some estate planning to make sure everything's handled properly when the time comes, my own daughter was already planning my funeral and I wasn't even sick. Sure, I was 62, but my last physical showed blood pressure within normal range, cholesterol managed with a low-dose statin, and the reflexes of a man 10 years younger. My doctor had said I was good for another 20 years easy, maybe 30 if I kept walking every morning, like Linda and I used to do. But apparently Amanda had decided I was ready for the nursing home. I looked at the papers without really reading them. Legal documents have a way of making everything sound reasonable, even when it's highway robbery. Lots of whereases and heretofores, clauses within clauses, the kind of language designed to confuse regular people into signing away their lives. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, settling back in my chair and crossing my arms, a defensive posture my body language probably said, but I didn't care. Troy slid into full sales mode, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees like we were just two guys talking about golf or baseball. "We'd handle all your day-to-day financial management, pay bills, manage investments, coordinate with your accountant. Take the burden off your shoulders so you can focus on enjoying your retirement." Enjoying my retirement. Like I hadn't been enjoying the last 6 months since I'd left the Department of Transportation. Like the morning walks, the woodworking projects in the garage, the volunteer work at the food bank were somehow burdens I needed to escape from. And the house? I asked. Amanda and Troy exchanged a look. Just a flicker, but I caught it. They'd rehearsed this conversation, probably multiple times in their BMW on the drive over from their condo in Rockland. Well, Amanda said carefully, "Maintaining this big place is expensive. Property taxes, utilities, upkeep, it's a lot for one person. We're thinking you might be happier in one of those nice senior communities. You know, people your own age, activities, medical care on site if you need it. A nursing home, they wanted to stick me in a nursing home at 62 and take everything Linda and I had worked for. The house we'd bought when Amanda was 7, where we'd hosted her birthday parties and Christmas dinners, where Linda had tended her rose garden until the cancer made her too weak to hold the pruning shears. The late afternoon sun was slanting through the windows now, highlighting the dust motes floating in the air. The kind of peaceful light that Linda used to love when she'd sit in her reading chair with a cup of tea and whatever mystery novel she was working through. Agatha Christie, Louise Penny, Elizabeth Peters, she'd devoured them all, always figured out who the killer was before the detective did. "What about my inheritance to you?" I asked. Their eyes lit up like slot machines hitting jackpot. Amanda tried to hide it, but I saw the hunger flash across her face. The same expression she'd had as a kid on Christmas morning, calculating which present to open first. "That's the beauty of this plan," Troy said, his voice warming with enthusiasm. "By transferring assets, now we can minimize tax implications later." Very efficient from an estate planning perspective. Efficient for who? Efficient for them to get their hands on my money while I was still alive to sign the papers. I picked up the estate document and scanned through the legal language. According to this paper, I'd be leaving Amanda the house, currently worth about $420,000 according to the Zillow estimate she'd probably looked up, my investment accounts totaling approximately $800 and my pension benefits that would continue paying out until my death. In return, I'd get a modest living allowance and the promise that they'd ensure my care and comfort for the remainder of my natural life. I'd get an allowance from my own money, like a 10-year-old getting his weekly spending cash. The whole thing was laid out in neat professional language that made it sound like they were doing me a favor, taking care of dear old dad, making sure he didn't have to worry about complicated financial matters in his declining years. I was 62, not 92. I could still deadlift 200 pounds, still drove the mountain roads to Tahoe without glasses, still remembered every detail of the bridge projects I'd managed over the decades. But apparently I was too feeble-minded to write my own checks. "This seems like a lot to process," I said, finally setting the papers back down on Linda's coffee table. "Of course it is," Amanda said, her voice taking on that maternal tone she'd learned in management training seminars. "That's exactly why we want to handle the complicated stuff for you. Just sign here, and we'll take care of everything else. Just sign here." Sign away 40 years of work, a lifetime of planning, Linda's life insurance money that was supposed to keep me comfortable until I was 90. I need some time to think about this, I said finally. Troy's smile flickered just a bit. The kind of micro-expression that probably worked great in sales meetings, but wasn't quite fast enough to fool someone who'd spent 35 years reading blueprints and catching engineering mistakes before they became catastrophes. Greg, I understand this feels overwhelming, Troy said, leaning back in his chair and spreading his hands in what was probably meant to be a calming gesture. But honestly, the sooner we get this sorted out, the better protected you'll be. These financial markets are volatile. You don't want to risk losing everything to another crash like 2008. Risk losing everything to market volatility, or risk losing everything to my own daughter. Seemed like 6 of 1/2 of the other from where I was sitting. Amanda jumped in before I could respond. Dad, we're not trying to rush you, but there are some time-sensitive issues. Property taxes are due next month, and there are some investment decisions that really can't wait. Property taxes. I'd been paying property taxes on this house for 27 years. Somehow I'd managed to remember the April 10th deadline every single year without my daughter's help. Amazing how that worked. Just a few days, I said, standing up and walking over to the windows. Outside, Mrs. Kim was working in her garden next door. The same garden where she and Linda used to trade tomato seedlings every spring. Normal people living normal lives, not plotting to steal each other's retirement funds. Of course, Amanda said, gathering up her papers with the efficiency of someone who'd closed plenty of deals. Take all the time you need. But Dad, remember, we're doing this because we love you. Mom would want us to take care of you. Mom would want us to take care of you. If only they knew what Mom had actually been thinking in those final months. After they left, I sat in that office for hours. The shadows grew longer as the sun set behind the oak trees, but I didn't bother turning on the lights. Just sat there in Linda's old chair thinking about 33 years of marriage. About raising Amanda from a scared 7-year-old whose biological father had walked out, about all the sacrifices Linda and I had made to give our daughter a better life. Linda's reading glasses were still on the desk where she'd left them the night before she went into the hospital for the last time. Horn-rimmed bifocals that she'd complained made her look like a librarian, though I'd always thought they made her look distinguished. She'd been working on something that night, some project she said was important but never got to finish. The cancer had moved fast in the end. 3 months from diagnosis to funeral. Hardly enough time to process what was happening, let alone plan for afterward, but Linda had always been a planner. Even when she was teaching 4th grade, she'd have the entire school year mapped out by August, backup activities ready in case the original lesson plans didn't work. I opened the desk drawer where she used to keep her personal papers, bills, insurance forms, the warranty information for the dishwasher we'd bought 2 years ago. Normal household stuff. But as I rifled through looking for nothing in particular, my fingers found something I'd never seen before. A small USB drive, silver and black, with a note taped to it in Linda's careful handwriting. Greg, if you're reading this, then something's happened to me and the kids are being kids. Everything you need is on here. Check the safety deposit box at First National. Key is behind my photo in the bedroom. Trust no one until you know everything. Love always, Linda. Kids being kids. Linda always had a way of putting things gently, even when she was talking about something serious. She used to say Amanda was exploring her independence when our daughter was 16 and staying out past curfew. She'd say the neighbor's dog was enthusiastic when it barked at 6 a.m. every morning. But kids being kids in this context seemed to carry a different weight. I plugged the USB into my computer, the same Dell desktop I'd been using for 5 years, reliable as a hammer and about as sophisticated. The drive opened up to reveal a series of folders organized with the same methodical precision Linda used for her lesson plans. Amanda, employment issues, Troy, financial problems, legal documents, protection plan. My hands were shaking slightly as I clicked on the first folder. What I found made my stomach clench like I'd been sucker punched. Linda had been suspicious of Amanda and Troy for months before she died. Suspicious enough to hire a private investigator. Suspicious enough to document conversations and gather evidence like she was building a court case. The employment folder contained printed emails between Amanda and her supervisor at the tech company, along with what looked like expense reports and travel receipts. As I read through them, a pattern emerged that made my blood run cold. Amanda hadn't been as successful at her marketing job as she'd led us to believe. The investigator had documented a systematic pattern of expense account fraud, personal purchases charged to the company credit card, inflated travel costs, conference expenses for events she'd never actually attended, personal dinner charges at restaurants in Rockland when she claimed to be at client meetings in San Francisco, hotel stays in Napa Valley billed as business development when the company had no clients in wine country, even a weekend spa retreat charged as a team-building exercise, though her entire department had been working remotely since the pandemic. The investigation showed she'd stolen at least $15,000 over the past year, maybe more. Small amounts that might not trigger an audit individually, but substantial money when it all added up. She was under internal investigation and facing likely termination, possibly criminal charges. No wonder she needed access to my bank accounts. She was about to lose her job and potentially face prosecution for theft. I clicked on Troy's folder with growing dread, and what I found there was even worse. My son-in-law, the financial advisor, had been running his own little Ponzi scheme with elderly clients. Troy Bennett, the man who'd married my daughter in a beautiful ceremony at the Crocker Art Museum, who'd promised to love and protect her, who'd called me dad at family barbecues for the past 2 years. The investigator had compiled bank records, client statements, and what looked like correspondence with the California Department of Financial Protection. Troy had been taking money from elderly clients, promising safe, conservative investments that would preserve their retirement savings. Instead, he'd been funneling their money into high-risk cryptocurrency ventures and day trading schemes that he clearly didn't understand. Mrs. Eleanor Rodriguez, 78 years old, had lost $45,000 of her late husband's pension money. Harold Kim, 82, had invested his entire $75,000 savings with Troy and watched it disappear in a series of Bitcoin trades that went south faster than winter geese. Margaret Thompson, a widow from Folsom, had trusted Troy with the $55,000 she'd inherited from her sister's estate. All gone. All lost to my son-in-law's gambling addiction disguised as financial planning. The investigation showed that Troy owed approximately $120,000 to various creditors. Most of it from cryptocurrency losses he'd tried to cover by borrowing from new clients. Classic pyramid scheme behavior, robbing Peter to pay Paul until the whole thing collapsed. The California State Securities Division was building a case against him. Wire fraud, elder abuse, operating without proper licenses, the kind of charges that came with serious prison time, not just fines and probation. Both of them were broke and facing potential criminal prosecution. No wonder they wanted to get their hands on my assets before the walls closed in. I leaned back in Linda's desk chair and stared at the computer screen until the words started to blur together. My daughter and her husband weren't just greedy, they were criminals. They'd been stealing from vulnerable old people, the exact demographic they wanted to put me into. The irony was brutal. They were trying to convince me I couldn't manage my own finances while they were busy losing other people's life savings to cryptocurrency scams and expense account fraud. I clicked on the legal documents folder and found copies of my real will and estate documents, not the fake ones Amanda had shown me, but the actual legal papers Linda and I had signed with our attorney, Victor Martinez, 3 years ago. According to the real documents, everything was set up to protect me and ensure that any inheritance to Amanda would be contingent on my approval and written consent. The will specifically stated that if I had reason to believe Amanda was financially irresponsible or engaged in fraudulent activities, I could revoke her inheritance entirely. Linda had insisted on that clause at the time, though I'd thought she was being overly cautious. "Greg," she'd said, "we need to protect you if something happens to me first. People change when money's involved, even family. My wife had seen this coming years before I did, but the protection plan folder was the masterpiece. Linda had been 3 steps ahead of everyone, documenting conversations and building a case like she was preparing for trial. She'd recorded phone conversations where Amanda and Troy discussed managing Dad's finances and getting me situated in a care facility where he'd be safe. She had video footage from a hidden camera in the kit, Kim showing them going through our mail and photographing bank statements when they thought I was taking a nap. Most damning of all, she had a recording of a conversation between Amanda and Troy from 2 months before Linda died. I recognized the voices immediately, my daughter and her husband planning my financial destruction while I was upstairs reading to Linda in her final days. "The old man's clueless," Troy's voice said through the computer speakers. "He thinks he's some kind of financial genius because he managed to pay off his house and save some money. He has no idea how to handle real wealth." "Dad's always been stubborn," Amanda replied, "but once Mom's gone, he'll be vulnerable. Grief makes people do stupid things. We just need to position ourselves as the responsible children who want to help. The power of attorney will give us access to everything," Troy continued. "Once we have that, we can liquidate the investments, sell the house, move him into one of those places in Roseville. He'll have his room and board covered, and we'll have the assets to work with." "How much do you think we're looking at total?" Amanda asked. "Conservative estimate." 1.2 million maybe, 1.5 if the house appraises well. Enough to cover my current obligations and set us up for a real future. His current obligations. He was talking about stealing my life savings to pay off his gambling debts. And if he resists, Amanda's voice had a cold edge I'd never heard before. "Then we get him declared incompetent. Dementia, failing mental capacity, whatever. I know doctors who will sign the papers for the right fee. Once he's declared unfit, we become his legal guardians and can do whatever we want with his assets. My own daughter was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so she could steal my money. The same daughter I'd taught to ride a bicycle, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, who'd cried in my arms when her first boyfriend broke her heart. I had to stop the recording and walk away from the computer. My hands were shaking with rage and something else, a deep sadness that felt like grief. The daughter I'd raised was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. After a few minutes of staring out the window at the gathering darkness, I went back to the computer and opened the final file in Linda's collection. It was a letter addressed to me, dated just 2 weeks before she died. My darling Greg, the letter began in Linda's careful teacher's handwriting. If you're reading this, then I'm gone and our daughter has shown her true colors. I've been watching her and that husband of hers for months now, and I know what they're planning. They think you're just a confused old man they can manipulate, that you'll be so lost without me that you'll sign anything they put in front of you. They're about to learn how wrong they are. The documents on this drive will show you exactly what they've been doing, stealing from others, planning to steal from you, treating elderly people like piggy banks to be broken when convenient. I've been gathering evidence since I first got suspicious about Troy's business practices 6 months ago. You remember when Mrs. Patterson from church mentioned that her grandson was having trouble with his financial advisor? How her retirement account had somehow lost $30,000 in management fees that she didn't understand. That grandson's advisor was Troy. Mrs. Patterson was too embarrassed to pursue it, but I started asking questions. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was looking at a pattern of elder abuse that made my skin crawl. Our son-in-law has been systematically targeting older clients, convincing them to trust him with their life savings, then gambling it away on cryptocurrency schemes that even a teenager would know were ridiculous. And Amanda knows. She's not some innocent victim. She's been helping him identify potential targets, using her marketing skills to help Troy refine his sales pitch to vulnerable seniors. I hired a private investigator named Marcus Rivera. You'll find his contact information in the safety deposit box at First National Bank. The key is behind my photo on your nightstand, the one from our 30th anniversary trip to Yellowstone. Greg, I need you to understand something important. This isn't just about money, though the money matters. This is about Amanda's character. We raised her to be better than this. We taught her right from wrong, instilled values that should have prevented her from ever considering something like elder financial abuse. But somewhere along the way, she made choices that led her down this path, and now those choices have consequences. I've arranged things so that if they try to take your inheritance, they'll get exactly what they deserve. The details are in the safety deposit box, along with the real estate documents that will surprise them very much indeed. Don't let them bully you. Don't let them make you feel guilty for protecting yourself. You're the smartest, most honorable man I've ever known, and you raised a daughter who should be following your example instead of trying to rob you blind. Make her face the consequences of her choices, Greg. It's the only way she might learn to be the person we tried to raise. I know this is painful. I know it feels like a betrayal of everything we believed about family. But protecting yourself isn't betraying Amanda. It's protecting the values we tried to teach her. Trust Marcus Rivera. Trust your own instincts. And remember that I love you more than words can express. Your devoted wife, Linda P.S. The safety deposit box also contains some other surprises that should make this whole situation considerably more interesting. Don't let them know what you know until you've seen everything. I had to read the letter 3 times before the full impact hit me. Linda hadn't just suspected what Amanda and Troy were planning. She'd been actively working to stop them for months. While I'd been focused on her medical treatments and trying to spend time with her before the cancer won, my wife had been playing chess with our daughter and son-in-law. The safety deposit box key was exactly where Linda said it would be, hidden behind her photograph on my nightstand. The same photo I looked at every morning when I woke up and every evening before I went to sleep. She'd been watching over me even before she died. I wanted to drive to the bank immediately, but it was already past 8 p.m. and First National didn't open until 9 a.m. The longest night of my life stretched ahead of me, minus 12 hours of knowing that everything I believed about my family was wrong, but not yet knowing how bad it really was. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Amanda's voice on that recording. The old man's clueless. Every time I started to drift off, I saw Troy's fake smile as he talked about protecting me from market volatility, while he was busy losing elderly people's life savings to Bitcoin scams. At 6 a.m., I gave up on sleep and made coffee. Strong coffee, the kind Linda used to complain was too bitter, but that she drank anyway because she knew I liked it. I sat in the kitchen watching the sunrise through the windows, thinking about 33 years of marriage and how Linda had always been the smart one, always saw things coming before I did. She'd been the one who insisted we get long-term care insurance when we were still in our 40s. She'd been the one who wanted to set up the family trust with specific protections against financial abuse. She'd been the one who'd suggested we use Victor Martinez instead of the cheaper attorney Amanda had recommended at the time. I'd thought she was being paranoid. Now I understood she was being careful. By 8:45 a.m., I was sitting in the parking lot of First National Bank waiting for them to open. The building was a typical small-town bank. Red brick, brass fixtures, the kind of place that had been serving Sacramento families for 50 years. Normal people doing normal banking business, not hiding evidence of family betrayal in safety deposit boxes. The manager, a pleasant woman named Diana Foster, who'd handled our accounts for years, led me down to the vault with appropriate sympathy. She'd known Linda, had processed the paperwork when we'd opened the safety deposit box 3 years ago. "Mr. Pearson," Diana said as we descended the marble steps to the basement vault, "I was so sorry to hear about Linda. She was such a lovely woman, always asked about my grandchildren when she came in." "Thank you," I said. "She thought very highly of you too." The safety deposit box was larger than I'd expected and heavier when Diana helped me lift it from its slot in the wall. Box number 347 minus a number I'd never known existed until Linda's note revealed it. We'd had a smaller box for years where we kept our passports and the deed to the house, but this was different. This was Linda's secret. Diana left me alone in the small viewing room with its single table and fluorescent lighting. The walls were painted institutional beige, the kind of color designed to be forgettable, but what I was about to discover would be impossible to forget. Inside the box were documents, lots of them, organized with Linda's typical precision in manila folders labeled with her neat handwriting. But these weren't the kind of papers you'd normally find in a safety deposit box. These were personal letters, printed emails, financial statements, and what looked like surveillance reports. The first folder was labeled Property Protection and contained documents I'd never seen before. Property deeds and loan papers for our house on Maple Street and my inherited cabin up at Lake Tahoe. But these weren't the original documents from when we'd bought the properties. These were new mortgages, taken out in the past year while Linda was supposedly too sick to handle financial matters. She'd somehow managed to quietly secure loans against both properties without my knowledge, $180,000 against the house and $120,000 against the Tahoe cabin. But here was the brilliant part. The loan terms were structured so that if the properties were inherited by Amanda, she'd be responsible for the full debt service. If the inheritance was refused or revoked, the loans would be forgiven entirely. Linda had essentially set a financial trap. Amanda could inherit properties worth $650,000 total, but she'd also inherit $300,000 in associated debt, leaving her with a net value of $350,000. And that was only if she could manage the monthly payments. The next folder contained bank statements for accounts I'd never heard of. Pearson Family Trust. Protected assets showed a balance of $847,000, and Pearson Emergency Fund showed another of $56,000, and Linda Pearson Education Memorial had $89,000. Nearly $1 million that Amanda and Troy thought was sitting in our regular investment accounts. Money they'd been planning to steal, but which Linda had quietly moved to protected trusts that only I could access. I had to sit down and catch my breath. My wife had been playing three-dimensional chess while battling cancer, moving money and restructuring assets, while Amanda and Troy thought they were manipulating a grieving widower. The third folder was the one that made my hands shake. Criminal evidence. Amanda and Troy contained bank records, recorded conversations, and photographs that painted a picture of systematic elder abuse that went far beyond what I'd seen on the USB drive. Troy wasn't just stealing from a few elderly clients. He'd been running a sophisticated operation that targeted seniors across 3 counties. The private investigator had documented at least 15 victims, with total losses exceeding $400,000. Amanda wasn't just aware of Troy's activities, she was actively participating. The evidence showed her using her marketing skills to create fake testimonials, professional-looking brochures, and even a fraudulent website that made Troy's operation look legitimate. They'd been working together to identify potential victims through church groups, senior centers, and community organizations. Amanda would befriend elderly women, gain their trust, then introduce them to her financial advisor husband, who could help them optimize their retirement planning. The depth of their betrayal was staggering. These weren't desperate people making poor decisions in a moment of crisis. This was a calculated, ongoing criminal enterprise that had been operating for over 2 years. At the bottom of the folder was a business card from Marcus Rivera, private investigator and attorney, along with a handwritten note from Linda. "Greg, call Marcus immediately after reading everything. He knows what to do next. Trust him completely. The final folder contained Linda's masterpiece, the protection plan. She documented every conversation with Amanda and Troy over the past 6 months, recording their discussions about my supposed mental decline and their plans for my financial future. She'd installed hidden cameras in our kitchen and living room, capturing footage of them going through our mail and photographing financial documents when they thought I was out running errands. Most importantly, she'd created a paper trail that would allow me to prove Amanda and Troy's criminal activities to law enforcement while simultaneously protecting myself from their theft. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would appear to agree to their demands, signing documents that gave them exactly what they asked for. But instead of inheriting liquid assets, they'd inherit debt-heavy properties and find themselves responsible for mortgages they couldn't afford. Meanwhile, the real money would be safely protected in trusts they didn't know existed, and the evidence of their criminal activities would be delivered to the appropriate authorities. Linda had even included a timeline. Greg should wait at least 48 hours after Amanda's initial proposal before contacting Marcus. This will allow them to feel confident in their plan and possibly incriminate themselves further. It had been 18 hours since Amanda and Troy had left our house. Linda wanted me to wait another day and a half before making my next move. I gathered all the documents back into their folders and closed the safety deposit box. Diana helped me return it to its slot, making polite conversation about the weather and how I was adjusting to life without Linda. If only she knew what Linda was still doing to protect me from beyond the grave. The drive home took 15 minutes, but I spent those minutes seeing my neighborhood differently. Mrs. Kim working in her garden, the Hendersons walking their golden retriever, kids riding bicycles on the sidewalk, normal people living normal lives, not plotting to steal from their family members. When I pulled into my driveway, Amanda's BMW was parked on the street. She was sitting on my front porch, waiting. Amanda stood up as I walked across the front lawn, smoothing down her navy blue business dress and adjusting her purse strap. She'd changed clothes since yesterday. This outfit was more casual, less corporate predator, and more concerned daughter. The calculated wardrobe choice wasn't lost on me. "Dad, I hope you don't mind me stopping by," she said, her voice carrying that false warmth I was beginning to recognize. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check on you in the neighborhood." Amanda lived in Rockland, 25 minutes away on a good traffic day. Our neighborhood wasn't on the way to anywhere she normally went. "Unless you counted the route to First National Bank, of course not," I said. Unlocking the front door, "Come in, Coffee, that would be lovely." I led her through the foyer past the family photos that chronicled her childhood. First day of school pictures, Christmas morning's graduation from UC Davis with her marketing degree. Normal family memories that felt surreal now that I knew what she was planning. The kitchen faced the backyard where Linda's rose garden was struggling without her daily attention. I'd been meaning to hire someone to help maintain it. But every time I looked at those roses, I remembered Linda kneeling in the dirt with her gardening gloves, humming old Beatles songs while she worked. "Dad, you look tired," Amanda said, settling onto one of the bar stools at the kitchen island. "Are you sleeping okay?" "About as well as you'd expect," I said, measuring coffee into the machine. "Losing your wife after 33 years takes some adjustment." "Of course it does. That's exactly why Troy and I think our proposal makes sense. You shouldn't have to worry about managing everything during such a difficult time." I watched the coffee drip into the carafe and tried to keep my expression neutral. 18 hours ago, I might have been touched by her concern. Now I knew she was probing to see how confused and vulnerable I seemed. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," I told her, which was true enough. Her eyes brightened immediately, and it's a lot to process. 30 years of financial planning, and suddenly I'm supposed to hand over control to someone else. "Dad, we're not someone else, we're family. And it's not about taking control, it's about helping you manage things so you can focus on taking care of yourself." Taking care of myself. While they took care of my money, I poured coffee into 2 mugs and handed her one, noting the relief that flickered across her face. She thought I was coming around to her way of thinking. "Tell me something," I said, settling onto the stool across from her. "What happens if I disagree with one of your financial decisions? If you want to sell something I'd prefer to keep or invest in something that seems too risky?" Amanda sipped her coffee, buying time to formulate an answer. "Well, obviously we'd discuss any major decisions with you. You'd always have input, not control, not final say. Just input like a consultant whose opinions could be ignored when convenient. And the house, you mentioned moving me to a senior community. What if I want to stay here, Dad? Honestly, this place is getting too big for one person. The maintenance costs alone must be eating into your budget. And what if something happens? What if you fall down those stairs or have a medical emergency when no one's around? The stairs I'd been climbing without problems for 27 years. The house where I'd lived safely through earthquakes, floods, and a pandemic. Suddenly, it was a death trap because a 62-year-old man couldn't possibly manage to live independently. "I appreciate the concern," I said carefully. but I'm not ready to give up my independence just yet. Amanda's mask slipped just slightly, revealing a flash of impatience before she composed herself. Dad, independence is important, but so is being realistic about your limitations. My limitations. 2 days ago, I'd helped my neighbor Joe install new Kit Kim cabinets. Last week, I'd hiked 5 miles in the Folsom Lake recreation area. Yesterday, I'd balanced my checkbook to the penny, the same way I'd been doing for 40 years. But apparently I had limitations. What does Troy think about all this? I asked. Troy's very enthusiastic about helping. He's got some really innovative ideas for maximizing your investment returns while minimizing risk. Maximizing returns while minimizing risk. The same pitch he'd used on Mrs. Rodriguez and Harold Kim before he'd lost their life savings to cryptocurrency speculation. Has he had good results with his other clients? Amanda's coffee mug paused halfway to her lips. Of course, Troy's very successful in his field. I'd love to hear some specifics. Maybe talk to some of his satisfied clients. Get their perspective on his advice. Dad, client confidentiality prevents him from sharing specific details about other people's finances, not details about their finances. Just general satisfaction with his services, professional references. The way you'd check before hiring any professional. Amanda set down her mug and leaned forward. Dad, are you having second thoughts about this? Because yesterday you seemed to understand that we're trying to help you. I'm not having second thoughts. I'm asking questions. The same questions I'd ask before hiring any financial advisor, but Troy's not just any financial advisor. He's your son-in-law. He's family. Family. The word she kept using like a magic spell that would make me stop thinking critically about their proposal. Amanda, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Are you and Troy having financial problems? The question hit her like a physical blow. She actually flinched before catching herself. Why would you ask that? Just wondering. Young couple, expensive lifestyle. The economy's been tough on a lot of people. We're doing fine, Dad. This isn't about our finances. This is about yours. But her voice had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by something harder and more defensive. This was the real Amanda talking now, not the concerned daughter persona she'd been performing. I'm glad to hear that, I said. I'd hate to think you were under financial pressure that might affect your judgment about my situation. Amanda's eyes narrowed slightly, and for just a moment I saw the calculation behind them. She was weighing how much to reveal, how far to push, whether to maintain the loving daughter act or drop it entirely. Dad, I'm starting to think you don't trust us. Should I? The question hung in the air between us like smoke. Amanda stared at me for a long moment, and I could practically see the gears turning in her head. This wasn't going according to her script. Of course you should trust us, she said finally. We're your family. We love you. Then why do I feel like you're rushing me into decisions I'm not ready to make? We're not rushing you. We're trying to help you before things get worse. What things? What's going to get worse? Amanda stood up and walked to the Kit Kim window, looking out at Linda's struggling rose garden. Dad, I'm going to be honest with you. We're worried about your mental state. There it was, the nuclear option, the threat I'd heard them discussing on Linda's recording. If I didn't cooperate voluntarily, they'd have me declared mentally incompetent. My mental state. Since Mom died, you've been different. Forgetful, confused about simple things. Yesterday, you seemed to have trouble understanding basic financial concepts. Yesterday, I'd been pretending to be confused to see how far they'd push their manipulation. Apparently, the answer was all the way to guardianship proceedings. What kinds of things have I forgotten? Last week, you called me 3 times asking if I'd heard from Mom. You seemed genuinely surprised when I reminded you that she'd passed away. I'd never called Amanda asking about Linda, not once. She was fabricating evidence of dementia, creating a paper trail that could be used in court to have me declared incompetent. I don't remember calling you about that. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Dad. The forgetfulness is getting worse. Amanda turned back from the window, her expression a mixture of false concern and something harder underneath. Troy thinks we should have you evaluated by a specialist. Someone who can assess your cognitive function objectively. What kind of specialist? A geriatrician who specializes in age-related cognitive decline. Troy knows someone excellent, very compassionate, who understands these situations. I bet he did. Probably the same doctor Troy had mentioned on the recording. Someone who would sign the papers for the right fee. And if this doctor determines I'm having cognitive problems, then we'd work together to make sure you get the care you need. There are excellent facilities that specialize in memory care, places where you'd be safe and comfortable. Memory care. They were planning to have me locked up in a dementia ward so they could steal my money legally. The coffee was growing cold in my mug, but I didn't trust my hands not to shake if I tried to lift it. The casual way Amanda was discussing destroying my life was almost more disturbing than the plan itself. What if I refuse the evaluation? Dad, why would you refuse? If there's nothing wrong, the evaluation will prove that and we can all stop worrying. But we both knew that wasn't how it would work. Once they got me in front of their compromised doctor, I'd be diagnosed with whatever condition justified their guardianship petition. I need more time to think about this. Amanda's patience was clearly wearing thin. Dad, time isn't something we have a lot of. These cognitive issues tend to progress rapidly. The longer we wait, the more difficult it becomes to arrange proper care. How long are we talking about? Troy thinks we should have you evaluated this week, maybe Friday. That would give us the weekend to discuss the results and make appropriate arrangements. 3 days. They wanted to have me declared incompetent in 3 days. My phone buzzed with a text message. Amanda glanced at it, and I saw her expression change. Is everything okay? I asked. Reaching for the phone, it's probably just spam. She said quickly, but I'd already seen the message. Mr. Pearson, this is Marcus Rivera. Per your wife's instructions, I'll be calling you this afternoon at 3 p.m. Please be available. Amanda had seen it too. Her face had gone pale, and she was staring at my phone like it was a bomb that might explode. Who's Marcus Rivera? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. I'm not sure, probably a salesman or something. But Amanda wasn't buying it. She knew that name meant something, even if she didn't know exactly what. Dad, have you been talking to anyone about your financial situation? Any advisors or consultants we don't know about? Why would you ask that? Because it's important that we coordinate any advice you're getting. If you're consulting with multiple people about the same issues, it could create conflicts or confusion. Translation: if I was getting advice from someone who wasn't in their pocket, it could interfere with their plans. I haven't made any decisions about advisors yet. But you've been talking to people? I could see the panic building behind Amanda's eyes. Their timeline was based on the assumption that I was isolated and vulnerable, that I had no one to turn to except them. The possibility that Linda might have arranged for outside help was clearly something they hadn't considered. Amanda, I think you should go. Dad, we're not finished talking about this. Yes, we are. I said I needed time to think, and I meant it. Pressuring me isn't going to change my mind. She stood there for a moment, clearly wanting to push harder but recognizing that too much pressure might backfire. Finally, she picked up her purse and walked toward the front door. We'll talk soon, she said, and there was something in her tone that sounded more like a threat than a promise. After she left, I sat in the Kim for a long time, thinking about the conversation and what it revealed. Amanda wasn't just planning to steal my money, she was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent to do it legally, and she was willing to fabricate evidence of dementia to make it happen. At exactly 3 p.m., my phone rang. Mr. Pearson, the voice on the other end, was calm and professional. This is Marcus Rivera. I believe you found your wife's message. I did. In the safety deposit box. Good. I'm sorry for your loss, by the way. Linda was an exceptional woman, very thorough, very determined to protect you. Thank you. I have to ask, how much do you know about what's been going on? Everything. Your wife hired me 8 months ago when she first became suspicious about Amanda and Troy's activities. I've been documenting their criminal behavior ever since. 8 months, Linda had been fighting cancer and building a case against our daughter simultaneously. The strength that must have taken was almost incomprehensible. Mr. Rivera, what exactly is your background? 25 years with the California State Attorney General's office prosecuting financial crimes, then 10 years as a private investigator specializing in elder abuse cases. Your wife found me through a referral from the district attorney's office. This wasn't some private detective from a strip mall. This was serious law enforcement experience focused exactly on the kind of crimes Amanda and Troy were committing, and you've been investigating them all this time? Continuously, bank records, phone conversations, surveillance footage, victim interviews, we have enough evidence to file federal charges against both of them. Federal charges: wire fraud, mail fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud. Troy's been using electronic banking systems to move money across state lines, which makes it federal jurisdiction. We're looking at substantial prison time for both of them. I had to sit down. My daughter wasn't just facing local prosecution, she was looking at federal prison. Mr. Rivera, I need to understand something. If you have all this evidence, why haven't you gone to the authorities already? Because Linda specifically requested that we wait until after her death and give you the opportunity to handle this your way first. She wanted you to have the choice of pursuing criminal charges or using the information defensively. What do you mean defensively? Well, Amanda and Troy don't know we have evidence of their crimes. You could use that information to protect yourself without necessarily sending them to prison. Linda felt you should make that decision yourself. Even dying of cancer, Linda had been thinking about my emotional well-being, giving me options instead of forcing me into a position where I'd have to choose between justice and family loyalty. What would you recommend? Honestly, I'd recommend letting me turn the evidence over to the FBI tomorrow morning. These people have victimized at least 20 elderly individuals that we know of, with total losses exceeding $500,000. They're going to keep doing it until someone stops them, and if I choose not to pursue charges, then we use the information to protect your assets and make sure they can't victimize you. But Mr. Pearson, I have to tell you, they're not going to stop with just you. Troy's gambling debts are getting worse, and Amanda's job situation is becoming desperate. They'll find other targets. The weight of responsibility was crushing. I could protect myself but leave other elderly people vulnerable, or I could stop Amanda and Troy permanently but send my daughter to federal prison. How long do I have to decide? Linda's plan calls for a meeting between all parties in 5 days. That would give you time to appear to go along with their demands while we finalize our preparations. What kind of meeting? A formal signing ceremony where you appear to transfer your assets to Amanda and Troy. They'll think they've won, but what they'll actually be signing are documents that trap them legally and financially. How does that work? Marcus explained Linda's strategy in detail. It was brilliant and ruthless in equal measure. Amanda and Troy would get exactly what they'd asked for, control of my estate, but instead of inheriting liquid assets, they'd inherit properties with substantial debts attached. The house and Tahoe cabin came with mortgages that would require monthly payments they couldn't afford, especially once their criminal activities were exposed. Meanwhile, the real money, nearly $1.1 million, would remain safely in protected trusts that only I could access. They'll own your properties, Marcus explained, but they'll also owe $300,000 in associated debt. Given their current financial problems, they won't be able to make the payments. The properties will go into foreclosure within 6 months, and legally, completely legitimate. They'll inherit exactly what the documents specify. The fact that it's financially ruinous for them doesn't make it illegal. What about the criminal charges? That's your decision. We can pursue charges immediately, wait until after the property transfer, or not pursue them at all. But I should mention that the FBI is already aware of our investigation. If we don't move forward, they might initiate their own prosecution based on complaints from other victims. I kept forgetting that this wasn't just about my family. Troy had been stealing from elderly people across Northern California, and Amanda had been helping him do it. Mr. Rivera, I need to ask you something personal. Do you have children? 2 daughters, both adults. What would you do if one of them was involved in something like this? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, Mr. Pearson. That's the hardest question anyone's ever asked me. But I think I'd remember that protecting them from the consequences of their actions isn't the same as loving them. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the results of their choices. Linda said something similar in her letter. Linda was a wise woman. She knew this decision would be difficult for you, which is why she gave you options. When do you need an answer? The meeting with Amanda and Troy is scheduled for Monday. If you want to pursue criminal charges, I'd need to know by Sunday so we can coordinate with law enforcement. And if I just want to protect myself, then we proceed with the asset transfer as planned and let them discover their mistake afterward. 4 days to decide whether to send my daughter to prison or just financial ruin. I'll call you Sunday morning, I said. The next 4 days were the longest of my life. I went through the motions of normal retirement, morning walks, grocery shopping, working in the garage. But my mind was consumed with the impossible choice Linda had left me. Thursday morning, Amanda called to check on me, her voice bright with false cheerfulness. Dad, how are you feeling about everything we discussed? Still processing it all, I said, which was true enough. Well, don't process too long. Troy's been working on some investment opportunities that are time sensitive. We'd hate for you to miss out because we waited too long to get the paperwork finalized. Investment opportunities. More cryptocurrency schemes probably, or whatever new scam Troy had cooked up to lose other people's money. What kind of opportunities? I'll let Troy explain the details when we meet. He's much better with the technical aspects than I am. Friday afternoon, Troy called directly. Greg, I wanted to touch base about our timeline. I've got the attorney standing by to finalize the documents, but we need to move quickly. Why the rush? Market conditions mainly. There's a window of opportunity for some investments that won't be available much longer. Plus, the sooner we get your assets properly structured, the sooner you can stop worrying about management details. What if I want to review everything with my own attorney first? There was a pause. Of course you can do that, but honestly it might slow things down unnecessarily. Our attorney has already reviewed everything thoroughly. Their attorney, the same legal expert who'd helped them structure documents to steal my inheritance. I'm still thinking about it, I said. Greg, can I ask what's holding you back? Yesterday you seemed ready to move forward. It's a big decision. I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing. The right thing is protecting your future and making sure Amanda inherits what you want her to have without unnecessary complications. That's what this is all about. What Amanda wanted to inherit was everything I owned. And what Troy meant by unnecessary complications was my continued existence as a free man. Saturday morning, I drove to Marcus Rivera's office. It was located in a professional building in downtown Sacramento, nothing fancy but clearly legitimate. The waiting room had the kind of furniture that said successful but not flashy, leather chairs that were comfortable but not ostentatious, diplomas and certificates on the walls, legal journals on the coffee table. Marcus himself was about 55, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen enough human nature to not be surprised by much. He wore a simple blue suit and a tie that had probably been expensive 5 years ago but was now just reliable. "Mr. Pearson," he said, shaking my hand with a firm grip. "Thank you for coming in. I know this is difficult. I need to see the evidence myself, all of it." Marcus led me to a conference room where he'd laid out files organized by victim and type of crime. 23 elderly people across Northern California, ranging in age from 67 to 89. Total losses $547,000. Each file contained bank records showing money transferred from victim accounts to accounts controlled by Troy. Correspondence where Troy promised safe investments and guaranteed returns, and documentation showing how the money was actually used cryptocurrency speculation, day trading, and covering Troy's mounting gambling debts. Amanda's involvement was documented in email exchanges where she provided Troy with information about potential victims, helped craft marketing materials that targeted elderly investors, and even posed as satisfied clients in fake testimonials. "This woman here," Marcus said, pointing to a file labeled Eleanor Rodriguez, age 78. "She lost her husband's entire pension, $67,000 that was supposed to support her for the rest of her life. She's now working part-time at a grocery store to pay rent." I looked at Mrs. Rodriguez's photo, a kind-faced grandmother who looked like she could be Linda's sister. Troy had stolen her future, and Amanda had helped him do it. And this gentleman, Marcus continued, Harold Kim, 82, retired postal worker. Troy convinced him to liquidate his savings account and invest it in emerging digital currencies. Mr. Kim lost $43,000 in 3 weeks. File after file of elderly victims, people who'd trusted Troy with their life savings and watched it disappear into his gambling addiction and Amanda's expensive lifestyle. "The pattern is always the same," Marcus explained. "Amanda identifies potential targets through social situations, church groups, community organizations, volunteer activities. She befriends elderly women, gains their trust, then introduces Troy as her successful financial advisor husband. How long have they been doing this? The earliest victim we can document is from 18 months ago, but based on their sophistication, I suspect they'd been practicing the techniques for longer than that 18 months. While Linda was fighting cancer and I was trying to spend time with her, our daughter was systematically targeting vulnerable elderly people and stealing their retirement savings." "Mr. Pearson, I need to tell you something else. The FBI is already building their own case based on complaints from some of these victims. With or without your cooperation, Amanda and Troy are likely facing federal charges within the next 6 months. What difference does my decision make then? Timing and evidence quality. If you cooperate, we can present a stronger case and potentially protect more victims. If you don't, they might have time to victimize additional people before they're arrested." I stared at the files spread across the conference table. 23 elderly people who trusted the wrong person and lost everything. People like Mrs. Rodriguez working at 78 to pay rent because Troy had stolen her husband's pension. "Marcus, if I cooperate with the criminal prosecution, what happens to the asset protection plan? We can do both. Linda's financial trap still works whether or not we pursue criminal charges. Amanda and Troy would inherit debt-heavy properties, discover they've been financially ruined, and then get arrested. And if I don't cooperate, the financial consequences still apply, but they might have time to flee before the FBI completes their investigation." Sunday morning, I woke up before dawn and sat in the Kit Kim with my coffee, watching the sun rise over Linda's rose garden. The roses were looking better. I'd hired Mrs. Kim's nephew to help with the yard work, and he had Linda's green thumb. At exactly 9 a.m., I called Marcus Rivera. "I've made my decision," I said. "I'm listening. I want to do both. The financial consequences and the criminal prosecution, are you sure? Once we involve federal law enforcement, there's no going back." I thought about Mrs. Rodriguez working at a grocery store at 78 because Troy had stolen her husband's pension. I thought about Harold Kim losing his entire life savings in 3 weeks. I thought about 23 elderly victims who trusted the wrong people. I'm sure Amanda and Troy made their choices. Now they get to live with the consequences. "All right, I'll contact the FBI this morning. They'll want to coordinate the timing so that Amanda and Troy don't get suspicious before tomorrow's meeting. What do I need to do? Act normal. Don't let on that you know anything about their criminal activities. Tomorrow we'll proceed with the asset transfer ceremony exactly as planned. And then, Then Amanda and Troy will spend about 24 hours thinking they've won before they discover what they've actually inherited. The FBI will arrest them Tuesday morning. I spent the rest of Sunday trying to act normal, whatever that meant anymore. I watched football, called my brother in Oregon, even drove to the hardware store to buy some wood stain for a project in the garage. Normal retirement activities for a normal 62-year-old man who wasn't about to send his daughter to federal prison. Monday morning, Amanda called bright and early. "Dad, are you ready for this afternoon? Troy's really excited to show you the investment opportunities he's been working on." "I'm ready." "Great. We'll be there at 2 p.m. with the attorney. This is going to be so good for everyone involved. Good for everyone involved." If she only knew, the attorney turned out to be a young man named Bradley, something who looked like he'd graduated from law school about 15 minutes ago. He arrived with Amanda and Troy in their BMW, carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Mr. Pearson," Bradley said, extending his hand with the kind of enthusiastic grip they probably taught in law school. "I'm Bradley Hutchinson from Hutchinson & Associates. I've prepared all the documents for today's transfer. Hutchinson & Associates." I wondered if associates meant anyone besides Bradley himself. We gathered in the dining room around the same table where Linda and I had hosted Christmas dinners and birthday parties for 30 years. Amanda sat across from me, her hands folded in her lap like a good student waiting for class to begin. Troy sat beside her, checking his phone every few minutes. Bradley opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents that looked impressive enough to intimidate anyone who wasn't expecting them. "Mr. Pearson, these documents are straightforward," Bradley began, his voice carrying that practiced confidence that young lawyers use when they want to sound more experienced than they are. "The power of attorney grants Amanda and Troy authority to manage your financial affairs in your best interest. The estate transfer ensures your assets are distributed according to your wishes. My wishes, right?" I looked at the first document, a power of attorney that was far more comprehensive than anything I would have agreed to if I hadn't known what I was really signing. It gave Amanda and Troy authority to sell property, liquidate investments, make healthcare decisions, even move me to a care facility if they deemed it necessary. "This gives them a lot of control," I said. "That's the point, Dad," Amanda said. "We want to be able to help you with anything that comes up. Help me right into a nursing home while they spent my money." I signed the power of attorney and moved on to the estate transfer documents. These were Linda's masterpieces, legal papers that looked like they were giving Amanda everything she wanted, but were actually financial time bombs. "The house goes to Amanda," Bradley explained, valued at $420,000. "The Lake Tahoe property, valued at $230,000, also transfers to Amanda. Your investment accounts, totaling $847,000, will be distributed according to the attached schedule." What Bradley didn't mention, because he either didn't know or didn't understand the significance, was that both properties came with substantial mortgages that Amanda would be responsible for. Monthly payments of $2,800 for the house and $1,500 for the Tahoe cabin. Amanda would need to come up with $4,300 every month just to keep the properties she was inheriting. Given that she was about to lose her job and Troy was about to be arrested for fraud, those payments were going to be impossible. "And what about my living arrangements?" I asked. "We've identified an excellent senior community in Roseville," Troy said, pulling out a brochure. "Sunrise Manor offers independent living with optional care services as your needs change." Sunrise Manor, the same facility where Troy had placed 2 of his elderly victims after convincing them to liquidate their assets for investment opportunities. "The monthly fees are very reasonable," Amanda added. "Only $3,220 per month for a 1-bedroom apartment, and that includes meals and activities. Only $3,220 per month. Nearly $40,000 per year for a nursing home room while they spent the rest of my money on their debts and lifestyle." I signed every document Bradley put in front of me, playing the role of the confused elderly man who was grateful for his family's help. Amanda and Troy signed their names with obvious satisfaction, thinking they'd just pulled off the perfect crime. "There is one more thing," I said as Bradley was putting the documents back in his briefcase. "What's that?" Amanda asked. "I have something your mother wanted me to give you." Amanda's face brightened with what looked like genuine emotion for the first time in days. "Something from Mom?" "What is it?" I reached into the drawer of the dining room sideboard and pulled out a manila envelope I'd prepared that morning. Inside were copies of the bank statements showing the real account balances, property deeds revealing the mortgages Linda had arranged, and photographs from Marcus's investigation. "She left this for you," I said, handing Amanda the envelope. Amanda opened it eagerly, probably expecting some sentimental letter or maybe even information about additional assets she could claim. Troy leaned over to read along with her. I watched their faces change as they worked through the documents. Confusion first, then growing alarm, then something approaching horror. "Dad," Amanda said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, "what is this?" "That's your inheritance. Congratulations." Troy grabbed the property deeds and started reading them frantically. "These mortgages, when were these taken out?" "Your mother arranged them over the past year. She wanted to make sure that if you inherited the properties, you'd get the full ownership experience, including the debt service." Bradley looked up from the documents he'd been reviewing with growing confusion. "Mr. Pearson, I don't understand. These mortgage obligations weren't disclosed in the estate planning documents I prepared." "That's because you weren't given complete information," I said. Amanda and Troy were very selective about what they told you. Amanda was still staring at the bank statements. "Dad, these accounts, there's almost nothing in them. The money you thought you were inheriting was moved to protected trusts months ago. Your mother was very thorough about asset protection." "This can't be legal," Troy said, his voice rising. "You can't saddle us with debt we didn't know about. Actually, you can inherit exactly what the documents specify. You wanted the properties, you got the properties. The fact that they come with substantial financial obligations doesn't make the inheritance invalid." Bradley was frantically flipping through his paperwork, trying to understand how he'd missed something so significant. "Mr. Pearson, if I'd known about these mortgages, I would never have advised my clients to proceed with this transfer." "Your clients didn't tell you the whole story," I said. "Did they mention that Troy's been running a financial fraud scheme targeting elderly investors? Or that Amanda's under investigation for expense account theft at her job?" The color drained from Bradley's face. He was beginning to realize he'd been used to facilitate what might be considered elder abuse, and his legal career was probably about to take a serious hit. "Dad, we can work this out," Amanda said, her voice taking on a desperate edge. "We made mistakes, but we're family. We can fix this. You're absolutely right. You made mistakes. Now you get to fix them yourselves." I pulled out the final folder, the one containing evidence of their crimes against other elderly victims. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out about Mrs. Rodriguez or Harold Kim or the 21 other elderly people you've been stealing from?" Troy's phone clattered to the table. "How do you know those names? Your mother hired a private investigator 8 months ago. She documented everything, every victim, every fraudulent transaction, every conversation where you planned to steal from me." I spread out the photographs of their elderly victims across the dining room table. "These are the people whose retirement savings you stole to fund your gambling addiction, Troy. These are the grandparents you convinced to trust you with their life savings." Amanda started crying, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic, the desperate sobbing of someone whose world was collapsing. "Dad, we can pay them back. We can make this right." "With what money?" "You just inherited $650,000 worth of real estate with $400,000 in associated debt, and that's assuming you can make the monthly payments of $4,300 starting next month." Troy was doing math in his head, probably for the first time in years. $4,300 per month? We can't afford that. No, you can't, especially since Amanda's about to lose her job for expense account fraud, and you're about to be arrested for wire fraud and elder abuse. Bradley stood up so quickly he knocked over his chair. "I need to leave. Right now. Sit down, Bradley," I said calmly. "You're not going anywhere until we finish this conversation." "Mr. Pearson, I was not informed about any criminal activities. I was hired to facilitate an estate transfer, not to participate in fraud. And that's exactly what you did. You facilitated an estate transfer. The fact that your clients were criminals doesn't make the transfer invalid." Troy tried one last desperate play. "Greg, we can work something out. You don't want to destroy your own daughter's life over some misunderstandings. You stole $67,000 from a 78-year-old woman who now has to work at a grocery store to pay her rent. You convinced an 82-year-old man to invest his entire life savings in cryptocurrency schemes you knew were worthless. These aren't misunderstandings, they're federal crimes. You don't understand the pressure we've been under," Amanda said. "Troy's business hit some rough patches and we needed money to cover temporary shortfalls." "Temporary shortfalls? Troy's been gambling away client money for over a year, and you've been helping him identify elderly victims to steal from." I looked at my daughter, the little girl I'd taught to ride a bicycle, the teenager I'd driven to soccer practice 3 times a week, the young woman I'd walked down the aisle at her wedding. "Amanda, your mother and I raised you to be better than this. We taught you right from wrong. Somewhere along the way, you decided that what you wanted was more important than what was right. Dad, please. We'll do whatever it takes to fix this. You're going to get that opportunity. Starting tomorrow morning when the FBI arrests both of you." The silence in the dining room was deafening. Amanda had stopped crying and was staring at me with something that might have been hatred. Troy was frantically scrolling through his phone, probably trying to figure out if he could transfer money to offshore accounts before the authorities froze his assets. Bradley had gone completely pale and was stuffing documents back into his briefcase with shaking hands. "I need to contact my malpractice insurance carrier immediately." You might want to contact a criminal defense attorney while you're at it, I said. Facilitating elder financial abuse is a federal crime even if you claim you didn't know what was happening. I had no knowledge of any criminal activity, Bradley protested. My clients represented this as a standard estate planning matter. Your clients lied to you. But that doesn't necessarily absolve you of responsibility for due diligence. Troy suddenly stood up. This conversation is over. Amanda, we're leaving. Sit down, Troy. Something in my voice made him freeze. Maybe it was the tone I'd used with construction crews when someone was about to make a dangerous mistake. Or maybe he finally realized that the confused old man he thought he'd been manipulating was gone. You're not leaving until we finish this conversation. You wanted my assets, you got them. Now we're going to discuss what happens next. What happens next, Troy said, his voice shaking with rage, is that we're going to challenge this whole thing in court. Undue influence, mental incapacity, fraudulent documentation. We'll tear this apart. Go ahead. I'm 62 years old in excellent health, and I passed a comprehensive cognitive evaluation just last week. Marcus Rivera arranged it with an independent neuropsychologist. As soon as we knew you were planning to have me declared incompetent, Amanda's head snapped up. Marcus Rivera? Who is Marcus Rivera? The private investigator your mother hired to document your criminal activities. He's also a retired prosecutor who specializes in elder abuse cases. Dad, you've been talking to investigators behind our backs? I've been protecting myself from thieves. The fact that those thieves are my own daughter and son-in-law doesn't change the legal situation. Troy was looking increasingly desperate. Greg, let's be reasonable about this. We can work out a payment plan for any money that might have been misappropriated from other clients. Make restitution, avoid unnecessary complications. Unnecessary complications like federal prison, Dad? Amanda said, her voice taking on the pleading tone she'd used as a child when she was caught doing something wrong. We never meant to hurt you. Everything we did was because we love you and want to protect you. Protect me from what? From having control over my own money. From living in my own house. From making my own decisions about my health care. Protect you from making mistakes that could cost you everything. The only mistake I almost made was trusting you. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking Linda's rose garden. The roses were in full bloom now, thanks to Mrs. Kim's nephew's care. Linda would have been proud. Amanda, do you remember when you were 8 years old and you stole $5 from my wallet to buy candy? Dad, what does that have to do with anything? Do you remember what I told you about consequences? Amanda's voice was barely a whisper. You said that when people make bad choices, they have to face the results of those choices. And that facing consequences was how people learn to make better decisions. That's right. And do you remember what happened next? You made me return the candy and apologize to the store manager. And I had to do extra chores for a month to earn back the $5. And did you ever steal anything again? No. Why not? Because I learned that stealing hurts people and that there are always consequences. I turned back to face her. So what happened to that little girl who learned about right and wrong? When did you decide that those lessons didn't apply to you anymore? Amanda started crying again, but these tears looked different. Less panic, more genuine remorse. I don't know, Dad. Somewhere along the way, I started thinking that normal rules didn't apply to me. That I was smarter than everyone else. That I deserved things other people had worked for. And now I'm terrified. Not just about prison, but about what I've become, about what I've done to innocent people. Troy wasn't interested in philosophical discussions about moral development. This is touching, but we need to focus on practical solutions. Greg, what would it take to make this go away? You can't make it go away. 23 elderly people have been victimized. The FBI has evidence of wire fraud, mail fraud, and elder abuse. This isn't something you can negotiate your way out of, but you could choose not to cooperate with the prosecution, Troy said. Without your testimony, their case becomes much weaker. You're right, I could choose to protect you instead of protecting future victims. Then do it, for Amanda's sake, if not for mine. I looked at my daughter, sitting at the dining room table where she'd done homework as a child, where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays, where Linda had helped her with college applications. Amanda, what do you think I should do? She was quiet for a long moment, wiping tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. I think she said slowly that you should do what Mom would have wanted you to do, and what's that? Let us face the consequences of our choices, even if it hurts. Even if it means we go to prison. Troy stared at his wife in shock. Amanda, what are you saying? I'm saying that my father raised me better than this. And somewhere along the way, I forgot who I was supposed to be. Troy looked at Amanda like she'd lost her mind. You can't be serious. You're talking about throwing away our entire future. What future? Amanda asked. The future where we keep stealing from elderly people until we get caught. The future where we destroy Dad's life to cover up our mistakes. That's not a future worth having. Amanda, think about what you're saying. Prison, federal prison. Years of our lives gone. Maybe that's what we deserve. I sat back down at the table, feeling something I hadn't experienced since Linda's death, a flicker of pride in my daughter. The Amanda I'd raised was still in there somewhere, buried under years of bad decisions and moral compromise, but still there, Troy. I said, Amanda's right. This isn't going away. The FBI has been building their case for months. You can cooperate and possibly reduce your sentence, or you can fight it and face the full consequences. Troy's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and his face went white. What is it? Amanda asked. My office. The State Securities Commission is there with a search warrant. The room fell silent. Even Bradley stopped shuffling papers. How long do we have? Amanda asked quietly. The FBI arrests are scheduled for tomorrow morning, I said. But given what just happened at Troy's office, I'd guess they might move that timeline up. Troy stood up abruptly. I need to get home. There are things I need to take care of. Sit down, I said firmly. You're not going anywhere to destroy evidence or transfer money to hidden accounts. You can't keep me here against my will. Actually, I can. Citizen's arrest for attempted elder financial abuse. Marcus Rivera is waiting in his car outside, along with a Sacramento County Sheriff's deputy. Troy sank back into his chair. The fight had gone out of him. Amanda looked around the dining room one last time, taking in the family photos on the sideboard. The china cabinet filled with wedding gifts from 33 years ago, the chandelier that Linda had insisted we couldn't afford, but which had lit every family celebration since. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth. All right? If I do the right thing now, if I cooperate with the investigation, testify against Troy if necessary, try to make restitution to the victims, is there any chance you could ever forgive me? It was the hardest question anyone had ever asked me. This was the daughter I'd raised, the little girl who'd brought me dandelions from the backyard when I was sick, who'd insisted on helping me change the oil in my truck even though she was only 10 years old. But she was also the woman who'd helped steal $67,000 from a 78-year-old grandmother. Amanda, forgiveness isn't something that happens overnight. It's something you earn through consistent action over time. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. If you spend the next several years proving that you've learned from this, that you're committed to making amends, that you've remembered who you're supposed to be, then yes, I think forgiveness is possible. But not guaranteed. Nothing in life is guaranteed. But the alternative is definitely no forgiveness. She nodded slowly. I understand. Troy had been listening to our conversation with growing desperation. Amanda, you don't have to do this. We can fight these charges. I know lawyers who specialize in federal defense. With what money? Amanda asked. We just inherited $250,000 worth of debt. Remember? We'll find a way. No, Troy. We won't, because I'm done finding ways to avoid consequences. Bradley cleared his throat. Mr. Pearson, I need to understand my legal position here. Are these documents legitimate or not? They're completely legitimate. Amanda and Troy have inherited exactly what the papers specify. Properties worth $650,000 with associated debts of $400,000. The inheritance is legal, binding, and final, but the debt obligations weren't disclosed during the estate planning process. That's because Amanda and Troy provided incomplete information about the estate's actual structure. They told you what they wanted to inherit, not what was actually available to inherit. Bradley was rapidly calculating the professional liability implications. I need to withdraw as counsel immediately. That's probably wise, I said. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus Rivera. FBI is moving up timeline. Arrests happening tonight. Deputy is ready to take them into custody. I looked at Amanda and Troy. It's time. Time for what? Troy asked. Time for you to face the consequences of your choices. Amanda stood up slowly. Dad, before they arrest us, I need to say something. I'm listening. Mom was right to protect you from us, and she was right to give you the choice about what to do with the evidence. I'm glad you chose justice over family loyalty. Amanda, no, let me finish. I love you, and I'm sorry. Not just sorry that we got caught, but sorry that we became the kind of people who would steal from elderly victims. Sorry that we planned to destroy your independence. Sorry that we betrayed everything you and Mom taught me about right and wrong. Tears were running down my face now. I love you too. That's never going to change, even if I go to prison, even if you go to prison. There was a knock at the front door. Marcus Rivera's voice called out, Mr. Pearson, we're ready. Troy made one last desperate attempt to run, bolting toward the back door, but the house was surrounded. 2 sheriff's deputies were waiting in the backyard. Amanda didn't run. She sat quietly at the dining room table where she'd grown up, waiting for them to come and arrest her. Mrs. Bennett, the lead deputy, said when they entered the dining room, You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and elder financial abuse. As they read Amanda her rights and placed handcuffs on her wrists, she looked back at me one last time. Take care of yourself, Dad, and take care of Mom's roses. Then she was gone. After the deputies left with Amanda and Troy, I sat alone in the dining room for what felt like hours. The house was quieter than it had been since Linda died. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to be ticking more softly. Marcus Rivera knocked on the front door around 10 p.m. "Mr. Pearson, how are you holding up?" "I'm not sure yet. It's going to take some time to process all this." Marcus settled into the same chair Amanda had occupied just hours earlier. "The FBI is pleased with how everything went. Both suspects are in custody, and they've already started talking. What are they saying?" Troy's trying to blame everything on Amanda, claiming he was manipulated into the scheme. Amanda's telling the truth about their victim targeting and asking what she can do to help the prosecution. That sounded like my daughter. Even facing federal prison, she was trying to do the right thing. What happens next? Arraignment hearings, probably Wednesday. The federal prosecutor will offer plea deals in exchange for cooperation and full restitution to victims. Can they make full restitution? They don't have any money. No, they can't. That's why victim restitution often comes from other sources. Marcus was looking at me meaningfully. "You're talking about my money." "I'm not talking about anything. I'm just noting that the victims of their crimes have lost over $500,000 and there aren't many sources available for restitution." I thought about Mrs. Rodriguez working at a grocery store at 78. About Harold Kim, who'd lost his entire life savings in 3 weeks. About 21 other elderly people who'd trusted the wrong financial advisor. If I wanted to help those victims, how would that work? You could establish a victim restitution fund, anonymous donations to help elderly people who've been targeted by financial fraud. It wouldn't be connected to the criminal case, just private charity. How much are we talking about? The total documented losses are $547,000, but not all victims would necessarily accept assistance more than $500,000. It was a substantial portion of my net worth, but not enough to affect my long-term security. And Linda had always said that money was only valuable if it served a purpose. "I'll think about it." Marcus stood to leave. "Mr. Pearson, for what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. It couldn't have been easy." After he left, I walked through the house turning off lights and checking locks. Normal bedtime routine, but nothing felt normal anymore. In the span of 1 week, I'd discovered my daughter was a criminal, set a trap to financially ruin her, and sent her to federal prison. I should have felt satisfied. Linda's plan had worked perfectly. Justice had been served. The elderly victims would get some measure of accountability even if they couldn't be made completely whole. Instead, I felt empty. The next morning brought a stream of phone calls. Reporters who'd somehow gotten wind of the story, neighbors who were curious about the police cars in my driveway, and my brother in Oregon who'd seen something on the news about Sacramento financial fraud arrests. "Greg, is that our Amanda they're talking about on Channel 6? "Yeah, Phil, that's her." "Jesus Christ, what happened?" I gave him the abbreviated version. Amanda and Troy had been stealing from elderly clients. They'd tried to steal from me, Linda had set a trap, and now they were facing federal charges. "How are you doing with all this?" "I don't know yet. Ask me again in 6 months." Wednesday afternoon, I drove to the federal courthouse downtown for Amanda's arraignment. I wasn't sure why I was going. She'd made it clear she didn't want me to visit her in jail, and I wasn't planning to post bail even if it was offered. Maybe I just needed to see this through to the end. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with plain wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly gray. Amanda sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit that was too big for her, flanked by a public defender who looked about 12 years old. She saw me in the gallery and gave a small wave. Not the desperate gesture of someone looking for rescue, just acknowledgement that I was there. The federal prosecutor read the charges: 17 counts of wire fraud, 8 counts of mail fraud, 12 counts of elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud. Each count carried potential sentences of several years. When the judge asked how she planned to plead, Amanda stood up. "Guilty, Your Honor, to all charges." Her attorney looked shocked. They'd clearly discussed a different strategy. The judge seemed surprised too. "Ms. Bennett, you understand that by pleading guilty to these charges, you could face substantial prison time." "Yes, Your Honor, I understand. And you're making this plea voluntarily without coercion or promises of specific sentencing recommendations?" "Yes, Your Honor. I committed these crimes and I want to take responsibility for what I did." Troy's arraignment was different. He pleaded not guilty to all charges and requested a jury trial. His attorney immediately started talking about entrapment, mental duress, and diminished capacity due to gambling addiction. After the hearing, I waited outside the courthouse until Amanda was transferred back to the jail. She saw me through the window of the transport van and pressed her hand against the glass. I pressed my hand against the outside of the window, matching her gesture. For just a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to wait by the window for me to come home from work. Then the van pulled away. That evening, I called Marcus Rivera. I want to set up the Victim Restitution Fund. Full amount, $547,000. Are you sure? Linda always said money was just a tool. If it can help those people rebuild their retirement security, that's a better use than letting it sit in investment accounts. I'll start the paperwork tomorrow. 2 weeks after the arraignment, Marcus Rivera called with an update. The Victim Restitution Fund is operational. We've been able to contact 19 of the 23 victims, and most are willing to accept assistance. What about the others? 2 victims passed away since the fraud occurred. The stress and financial devastation contributed to declining health. 1 victim's family doesn't want to be involved in anything connected to the case, and 1 victim, Mrs. Rodriguez, wants to meet with you personally before accepting any money. Mrs. Rodriguez, the 78-year-old grandmother working at a grocery store because Troy had stolen her husband's pension. She wants to meet with me. Why? She says she needs to look in the eyes of the man whose daughter stole her future and decide if his money is clean enough to accept. I couldn't blame her. If someone had stolen my life savings, I'd want to meet their family too. Set it up. The grocery store where Mrs. Rodriguez worked was a small chain market in Oak Park, the kind of neighborhood store that catered to families who couldn't afford the big suburban supermarkets. I found her in the produce section, carefully arranging apples in perfect pyramids. She was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 5 feet tall, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and hands that showed decades of hard work. She wore the store's red vest over a simple white blouse, and her name tag read Eleanor Happy to Help, Mrs. Rodriguez. She looked up at me with dark eyes that held a mixture of curiosity and wariness. You're Gregory Pearson? Yes, ma'am. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. She set down the apple she'd been placing and studied my face carefully. You look like your daughter, around the eyes. People have told me that. She's a beautiful woman and very charming. That's how she got my trust. We stood there in the produce section while shoppers moved around us, filling their carts with groceries they could afford because their retirement savings hadn't been stolen by my daughter. Mr. Pearson, why do you want to give me money? Because what my daughter and her husband did to you was wrong. And because I have money that I didn't need while you're working at 78 because they stole what you did need. That's not your fault. Maybe not directly. But I raised her. I taught her right from wrong, or I thought I did. Somewhere along the way, she forgot those lessons. Mrs. Rodriguez picked up another apple and examined it for bruises before adding it to the display. Do you have other children? No. Amanda was our only child. Then you know what it's like to love someone who disappoints you. Yes, I do. She was quiet for a moment, continuing to work while she thought. My grandson, Miguel, he's a good boy, but he got involved with drugs when he was 16. Stole money from my purse, pawned his grandfather's tools, lied about everything. What happened to him? I stopped giving him money, stopped making excuses for him. Let him face the consequences of his choices. It was the hardest thing I ever did. Did it work? He's been clean for 3 years now. Has a job, an apartment, a girlfriend who doesn't use drugs, but it took almost losing everything before he was ready to change. Mrs. Rodriguez finished with the apples and moved to the oranges. Your daughter, she's facing consequences now. Yes, she is. Good. Maybe she'll learn something. I hope so. Mr. Pearson, I don't need charity. I've been working since I was 14 years old, and I can take care of myself. I know you can. But you shouldn't have to at 78 because someone stole your husband's pension. She stopped working and looked at me directly. If I accept your money, what do you get out of it? Peace of mind, I guess. And maybe the feeling that some good came out of this mess. How much money are we talking about? Whatever you lost? The investigator said it was $67,000. Mrs. Rodriguez's hands stilled on the oranges. $67,000 was probably more money than she'd see in the next 5 years of grocery store wages. That's a lot of money. It's not enough to replace what you lost, but it might help. Mr. Pearson, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Are you doing this because you feel guilty or because you think it's right? I thought about that question for a moment. Both, I think. I feel guilty that my daughter hurt you, even though I didn't know she was doing it. But mostly I think it's right because you shouldn't have to suffer for her mistakes. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded slowly. My husband worked for the post office for 37 years. Every paycheck, he put money aside for our retirement. He said he wanted to make sure I'd be taken care of if something happened to him. He sounds like a good man. He was. And your daughter's husband stole those years of careful saving in 3 weeks. I know, I'm sorry. Don't apologize for something you didn't do. She paused in her work again. But Mr. Pearson, if I accept this money, I want to earn it. What do you mean? I want to work with your fund to help other elderly people avoid getting scammed. I learned things during this experience, warning signs, red flags, questions people should ask before trusting anyone with their money. That's a great idea. I can't prevent every fraud, but maybe I can help some people protect themselves. Mrs. Rodriguez extended her hand to shake mine. Mr. Pearson, I'll accept your assistance, not as charity, but as partnership in protecting other elderly people from what happened to me. Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez. I think my wife would have approved of that arrangement. Your wife was the one who set the trap for your daughter? Yes. Linda planned the whole thing to protect me and make sure Amanda faced consequences. Mrs. Rodriguez smiled for the first time since I'd met her. She sounds like a smart woman. I wish I could have met her. She would have liked you. She always said that the best people were the ones who kept working to make things better, even when life knocked them down. 3 months after the arrests, Amanda's sentencing hearing arrived. She'd cooperated fully with the federal prosecution, providing testimony that helped convict 2 other financial advisors who'd been part of Troy's network. Her public defender had negotiated a plea agreement for a reduced sentence. I sat in the same courtroom where she'd been arraigned, watching my daughter stand before a federal judge to learn how many years she'd spend in prison. The prosecutor spoke first, outlining the scope of Amanda's crimes but acknowledging her cooperation. Ms. Bennett provided substantial assistance in identifying other victims and co-conspirators. Without her testimony, we would not have been able to dismantle the larger fraud network. Amanda's attorney argued for the minimum sentence under the plea agreement. Your Honor, Ms. Bennett has shown genuine remorse for her actions. She's already begun making amends by working with victim advocacy groups from jail, providing education about fraud prevention techniques. Finally, the judge asked Amanda if she wanted to make a statement. She stood up slowly, wearing the same orange jumpsuit she'd had on for months. She'd lost weight, and her hair had grown out from its corporate styling into something more natural. Your Honor, she began, her voice steady but quiet, I want to start by apologizing to the victims of my crimes. I know that sorry doesn't give back the money I helped steal or repair the damage I caused to their lives. But I am genuinely sorry, and I'm committed to spending the rest of my life making amends. She paused, looking briefly at me in the gallery before continuing. I also want to apologize to my father, who raised me to be better than this. I betrayed his trust, his values, and everything he and my mother taught me about right and wrong. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want him to know that I remember who I'm supposed to be now. The judge listened impassively, then announced the sentence. Ms. Bennett, you are hereby sentenced to 36 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised release. You're also ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $127,000 in your calculated share of the victim losses. 3 years. Amanda would be 36 when she got out, middle-aged, but still young enough to rebuild her life if she chose to. Troy received 8 years. His refusal to cooperate and his attempts to blame Amanda had not impressed the judge. After the sentencing, I waited outside the courthouse until Amanda was brought out for transport back to the jail. She saw me and asked the marshal if she could speak to me for a moment. Dad, thank you for coming. I wanted to hear what the judge decided. 3 years. It could have been worse. What will you do when you get out? Amanda looked tired, but somehow more peaceful than she'd appeared in years. I want to work with elderly fraud victims, maybe become a counselor or advocate. Use what I've learned to help people protect themselves. That sounds like something your mother would approve of. I hope so. Dad, I need to tell you something. I've been working with Mrs. Rodriguez through letters while I've been in jail. She's been teaching me about the real impact of financial fraud on elderly victims. She mentioned that when I saw her last week, she's an amazing woman, strong, forgiving, wise. I don't deserve her friendship, but she's given it anyway. The marshal was getting impatient, but Amanda had one more thing to say. Dad, I know about the Victim Restitution Fund. Mrs. Rodriguez told me you used your own money to help all the people Troy and I hurt. It seemed like the right thing to do. It was more than right. It was generous and loving and exactly what Mom would have done. Your mother planned for this possibility. She wanted to make sure that even if the worst happened, some good could come from it. Dad, yes. Do you think there's a chance that someday when I get out, we could have some kind of relationship again? Not the way it was before, but something? I thought about the little girl who'd brought me dandelions, about the teenager who'd helped me change the oil in my truck, about the woman who'd stood up in federal court and taken responsibility for her crimes. Amanda, your mother used to say that people aren't defined by their worst moments. They're defined by what they do after their worst moments, and what do you think? I think that if you spend the next 3 years proving that you've learned from this, that you're committed to making amends, that you remember who you're raised to be, then yes, I think we can build some kind of relationship. Amanda started crying, but they were different tears than I'd seen from her before. These looked like relief. I love you, Dad. I love you too. That never changed, even when I was angry and disappointed. The marshal led her away, and I drove home to the house on Maple Street. Mrs. Kim was working in her garden next door, and she waved as I pulled into the driveway. Gregory, how did it go today? 3 years. She'll be out when she's 36. That's not too long. She's still young enough to start over. I hope so. That evening, I sat in Linda's reading chair with a cup of coffee and opened the mail. There was a letter from Harold Kim, the 82-year-old man who'd lost his life savings to Troy's cryptocurrency schemes. Dear Mr. Pearson, the letter began, I want to thank you for your generosity in helping victims of your daughter's crimes. The money you provided has allowed me to move out of my nephew's spare bedroom and into a small apartment of my own. More importantly, it has restored my sense of dignity and independence. I don't blame you for what your daughter did, but I admire you for taking responsibility anyway. That says something about the kind of man you are and the kind of parents you and your wife were. My wife passed away 5 years ago, and I understand something about grief and disappointment. I hope you find peace in knowing that your actions have helped many elderly people rebuild their lives. Sincerely, Harold Kim. I set the letter aside and looked out the window at Linda's rose garden, flourishing under Mrs. Kim's nephew's care. 2 years later, I was sitting in the conference room of the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office, presenting our fraud prevention program to a group of social workers and victim advocates. Mrs. Rodriguez sat beside me, wearing a professional blazer instead of her grocery store vest, holding a folder full of materials we developed together. The key warning signs Mrs. Rodriguez was saying are urgency, secrecy, and promises that sound too good to be true. If someone tells you that you need to make an investment decision immediately, or that you can't tell anyone else about the opportunity, or that you're guaranteed returns of more than 10% per year, those are red flags. The Linda Pearson Foundation for Elder Financial Protection had grown beyond what I'd originally imagined. What started as victim restitution had evolved into education, advocacy, and support services for elderly people targeted by financial predators. Mrs. Rodriguez had become the foundation's education director, traveling to senior centers and community organizations across Northern California to teach fraud prevention. She had a gift for connecting with elderly audiences because she'd lived through what she was warning them about. Mrs. Rodriguez, one of the social workers, asked, how do we help elderly people who are embarrassed about being victimized? A lot of them don't want to admit they were fooled. You tell them that smart people get scammed too. Mrs. Rodriguez replied, the criminals who do this are professionals. They study human psychology. They practice their techniques. They target people who are trusting and generous. Being victimized doesn't mean you're stupid. It means you encountered someone whose job was to deceive you. After the presentation, Mrs. Rodriguez and I drove back to Sacramento in comfortable silence. We'd developed an easy working relationship over the past 2 years, based on mutual respect and shared purpose. Gregory, have you heard from Amanda lately? She calls every Sunday. She's been working in the prison library, teaching literacy classes to other inmates. That's good. She's finding ways to help people. Amanda had been writing to me regularly from federal prison. Her letters had changed over time, becoming less focused on her own situation and more concerned with the welfare of her fellow inmates. She'd started a financial literacy program for women who were preparing for release, teaching them about budgeting, credit repair, and avoiding predatory lenders. She wants to get her master's degree in social work through correspondence courses. I told Mrs. Rodriguez plans to specialize in victim advocacy when she gets out. Do you think she means it? I think she does. The Amanda who went to prison 2 years ago was selfish and entitled. The woman who writes to me now seems to understand that the world doesn't revolve around her wants and needs. People can change. Look at my grandson, Miguel. He's getting married next month to a lovely girl he met in his addiction recovery group. We pulled into the parking lot of the senior center where the foundation had its offices. It was a modest space, 2 rooms in a building that also housed a food bank and a legal aid clinic, but it was ours. Mrs. Rodriguez, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever regret accepting my help? Taking money from the family of the people who hurt you? She was quiet for a moment, considering the question. At first, I wasn't sure. It felt like charity, and I've never been comfortable accepting charity. But then I realized it wasn't charity. It was restitution. And more than that, it was an opportunity to prevent other people from going through what I went through. I've been thinking about Amanda a lot lately. Wondering if I made the right choices. What do you mean? Maybe I could have handled things differently. Gotten her help for whatever psychological issues led her to steal from elderly people, found a way to protect the victims without sending my daughter to prison. Mrs. Rodriguez turned in her seat to look at me directly. Gregory, your daughter made adult choices that hurt innocent people. The victims needed justice, and future victims needed protection. You chose to prioritize their welfare over your family loyalty. And that was the right choice, even though she's my daughter, especially because she's your daughter. You raised her to know better, which means she can't claim ignorance as an excuse. When children become adults and commit crimes, sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is let them face consequences. I thought about that as we walked into the building. The foundation's walls were covered with thank you letters from elderly fraud victims who'd received assistance, photos from prevention workshops, and newspaper articles about financial predators who'd been arrested. In the center of the main wall was a framed photo of Linda in her classroom, surrounded by fourth graders who were grinning at the camera. Underneath was a quote from her last letter. The best protection against being deceived is education, preparation, and the knowledge that someone loves you enough to tell you the truth. My phone rang. It was my weekly call from Amanda. Dad, how are you? I'm good. Just finished a presentation at the DA's office with Mrs. Rodriguez. How is she? I got her letter last week. She's been helping me develop the curriculum for my victim advocacy classes here. She's well, keeps busy with the foundation work. Dad, I need to tell you something. I've been accepted to the master's program at Sacramento State. They're allowing me to complete some coursework by correspondence while I'm here, and I can finish the degree after my release. That's wonderful news. I want to work with elderly fraud victims when I get out. I know it might seem strange, given what I did, but I think my experience could help people understand how these scams work. Mrs. Rodriguez thinks that's a good idea. She says the best advocates are often people who've learned from their own mistakes. Dad, yes. Do you think Mom would be proud of what I'm doing now? The education programs, the victim advocacy work, trying to make amends. I looked at Linda's photo on the wall, remembering the woman who'd loved our daughter enough to set a trap that would force her to face consequences. Amanda, I said, looking at Linda's photograph, I think your mother would be proud of who you're becoming. Not proud of what you did, but proud that you're using your experience to help others avoid being victimized. I hope so. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. All right, when I get out next year, do you think there's a place for me in the foundation's work? I know it might be uncomfortable for victims to work with someone who committed the same crimes that hurt them. I thought about Mrs. Rodriguez's comments about redemption and second chances, about the difference between punishment and rehabilitation. Amanda, Mrs. Rodriguez, has been saying, we need someone who understands the criminal mindset to help develop better prevention strategies. Someone who knows how financial predators think and operate, and you think that could be me? I think that could be you if you're genuinely committed to the work and not just looking for a job when you get out. I'm committed. More committed to this than I've ever been to anything in my life. After we hung up, I sat in the foundation office for a while, thinking about the strange turns life can take. 3 years ago, I'd been a recently retired engineer dealing with my wife's death and my daughter's betrayal. Now I was running a victim advocacy organization, with the woman my daughter had robbed preparing to potentially work with my daughter when she got out of federal prison. Mrs. Rodriguez knocked on my office door. Gregory, there's someone here to see you. A man in his 70s was waiting in the reception area, wearing a clean but worn suit and holding a worn baseball cap in his hands. Mr. Pearson, I'm Frank Williams. I think your daughter and her husband stole money from my wife. I invited Mr. Williams into my office and listened as he told his story. His wife had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's 2 years ago, and in her confusion, she'd given $25,000 to someone claiming to be a financial advisor who could help protect their savings from nursing home costs. The name on the check was Troy Bennett Financial Services, Mr. Williams said. I didn't find out about it until after Margaret passed away last month, and I was going through her papers. Troy Bennett. Even from federal prison, my former son-in-law's crimes were still surfacing. Mr. Williams, Troy Bennett, is serving an 8-year sentence for financial fraud. Your wife was one of his victims. Can I get the money back? Probably not from Troy. He doesn't have any assets left, but the foundation might be able to help. I explained our victim assistance program and helped Mr. Williams file a claim. It was cases like his that reminded me why Linda's plan had been necessary, why some people needed to face serious consequences before they'd stop hurting others. That evening, I drove home to the house on Maple Street. Mrs. Kim was working in her garden, and Linda's roses were in full bloom thanks to her nephew's continued care. Gregory, Mrs. Kim called out, "How was your day? Complicated." But good, I think. That describes most days at our age, doesn't it? Inside the house, I made dinner and sat at the Kit Kim table where Linda and I had shared thousands of meals over 33 years of marriage. The house felt less empty now than it had 3 years ago. Not because the grief was gone, but because I'd found purpose in Linda's final plan. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Mr. Pearson, this is Rachel Rivera, Marcus Rivera's daughter. I work with domestic violence victims who've also experienced financial abuse. I wondered if you'd be interested in collaborating on some educational programs. Marcus Rivera had retired from private investigation work the year before, but he'd stayed involved with the foundation as a volunteer consultant. His daughter Rachel worked for a nonprofit that helped women escape abusive relationships. I texted back, definitely interested. Let's set up a meeting. The intersection between domestic violence and financial abuse was something we'd been wanting to address. Many elderly victims of financial fraud were also dealing with family members who were exploiting them emotionally and financially. And many younger victims of relationship abuse found themselves financially vulnerable because their partners had destroyed their credit or stolen their savings. Around 9 p.m., the phone rang. It was Amanda, calling outside her usual schedule. "Dad, something happened today that I wanted to tell you about." "What is it?" "There's a new woman here who was convicted of embezzling from the nonprofit where she worked. She's been asking me about the victim impact statements from my case, wanting to understand how her crimes affected people." That sounds positive. It made me realize something. For the first 2 years I was here, I was focused on my own rehabilitation, my own education, my own path forward. But real redemption isn't just about changing yourself. It's about helping others avoid the mistakes you made. What do you mean? I want to start visiting high schools and colleges, talking to business students about ethical decision-making, showing them where small compromises can lead if you're not careful about maintaining your moral boundaries. That sounds like something your mother would definitely approve of. I've been thinking about Mom a lot lately, about the trap she set and why she did it. At first, I was angry that she didn't trust me enough to talk to me directly about what I was doing wrong, and now I understand that she knew I wasn't ready to listen. I was too far down the path of justifying my actions to hear criticism or advice. She knew that the only thing that would get my attention was facing the full consequences of my choices. Your mother always said that sometimes love means letting people learn from their mistakes, even when it's painful to watch. Dad, yes? When I get out, I don't want to just work with the foundation. I want to be worthy of being your daughter again. 1 year later, I stood outside the federal prison in Dublin, California, waiting for Amanda's release. 3 years had passed since that afternoon when she and Troy had tried to steal my inheritance. 3 years since Linda's plan had set everything in motion. Amanda walked out of the prison gates carrying a single duffel bag and wearing clothes that Mrs. Rodriguez had sent her, simple jeans and a blue blouse that made her look younger than her 36 years. Her hair was longer now, and she moved with a different kind of confidence than the corporate swagger she'd displayed before. "Dad," she said, hugging me carefully, like she wasn't sure she deserved the embrace. "Welcome back. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." I promised I would, and I keep my promises. The drive back to Sacramento took 2 hours, and we spent most of it talking about her plans. Amanda had completed her master's degree in social work through correspondence courses and had already been accepted into a victim advocacy program with the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office. Mrs. Rodriguez arranged the interview, Amanda said. She told them that the best way to catch a thief is to hire a former thief, and the best way to protect fraud victims is to work with someone who understands how the crimes are committed. She's become quite an advocate for second chances. She saved my life, Dad. Her letters, her friendship, her willingness to forgive me, it gave me something to work toward during the worst parts of being in prison. We drove through downtown Sacramento, past the courthouse where Amanda had been sentenced, past the building where the foundation had its offices. The city looked different to me now, more like home and less like a place I was just passing through. "Dad, can I ask you something that's been bothering me for 3 years?" "Of course. Why did you really cooperate with the criminal prosecution? You could have just used Mom's financial trap to protect yourself and let us face the civil consequences. Why did you choose to send me to federal prison?" I thought about that question for a moment, because 23 elderly people had been victimized, and you and Troy were going to keep doing it until someone stopped you. I couldn't protect myself and leave other vulnerable people at risk, even though I'm your daughter, because you're my daughter, because I raised you to know better, and that made your choices more inexcusable, not less. Amanda was quiet for several miles. "I hated you for that decision. For about the first year I was in prison. I figured you probably did. But then Mrs. Rodriguez helped me understand that you were protecting people like her from people like me, and that was what a good father should do, even when it hurt." We pulled into the driveway of the house on Maple Street. Mrs. Kim was in her garden as usual, and she waved enthusiastically when she saw Amanda in the passenger seat. "She's been asking about you every week," I told Amanda. "She says the garden misses having young hands to help with the heavy work." Inside the house, Amanda stood in the kitchen looking around at all the familiar details. The coffee maker where Linda had made her morning tea, the dining room table where we'd shared family meals, the living room where she'd done homework as a teenager. It looks exactly the same. Most things are the same. I've added some photos from the foundation work, and there's a memorial corner for your mother with pictures from her teaching career. Amanda walked over to Linda's memorial corner and studied the photographs, Linda with her 4th grade classes over the years, Linda receiving a Teaching Excellence Award, Linda and me on our 25th anniversary. Dad, do you think she would have forgiven me? I think she already did. She planned the financial trap to teach you consequences, not to destroy you. She wanted you to learn from your mistakes and become the person she knew you could be. Have I become that person? I looked at my daughter, the woman who'd spent 3 years in federal prison teaching literacy classes, developing victim advocacy programs, and earning a master's degree in social work. The woman who'd maintained correspondence with elderly fraud victims, not to ask forgiveness, but to understand the impact of her crimes. Amanda, the daughter I raised, was generous, hardworking, and committed to helping others. The woman who went to prison had lost sight of those values. But the woman standing here now seems to have found them again. That evening, we had dinner with Mrs. Rodriguez and her grandson Miguel, who'd driven down from San Francisco with his new wife. It was a strange gathering, the victim, the perpetrator, and the father who'd been caught in between. But it felt like family, the kind of family that's chosen rather than inherited. Amanda, Mrs. Rodriguez said over dessert, I have a proposition for you. What kind of proposition? I want you to be the keynote speaker at next month's fraud prevention conference. Tell your story not just as a cautionary tale, but as evidence that people can change and make amends. Mrs. Rodriguez, I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of public exposure. You're ready. And more importantly, people need to hear from someone who's been on both sides of financial fraud as a perpetrator and now as an advocate. 6 months later, Amanda was working full-time with the Linda Pearson Foundation for Elder Financial Protection. She developed a program called Inside the Scam that taught elderly people how financial predators think and operate. Her presentation included videos of actor-portrayed scam attempts, analysis of psychological manipulation techniques, and testimonials from victims who'd learned to recognize and avoid fraud attempts. The program was controversial at first. Some people thought it was inappropriate for a convicted criminal to lead fraud prevention efforts. But the results spoke for themselves. Communities where Amanda presented her program saw a 40% decrease in reported financial fraud targeting elderly residents. Gregory, Mrs. Rodriguez said to me one afternoon as we watched Amanda facilitate a workshop for senior center volunteers, do you think Linda would be proud of how this all turned out? I watched my daughter patiently explaining to a group of 70-somethings how to recognize investment scams, how to verify the credentials of financial advisors, how to protect themselves from high-pressure sales tactics. Mrs. Rodriguez, I think Linda would be amazed. She set a trap to teach Amanda consequences, but I don't think she imagined it would lead to Amanda dedicating her life to protecting other elderly people from fraud. Your wife was a smart woman, she was, but I think she would say that Amanda deserves the credit for choosing redemption over resentment. These days, I live comfortably in the house on Maple Street, managing the foundation's finances and helping develop new victim assistance programs. Amanda has her own apartment in Midtown Sacramento, but she comes for dinner every Sunday and helps me maintain Linda's rose garden. The money Linda moved to protected accounts has allowed me to fund the foundation's work for years to come. The properties that Amanda inherited were eventually sold to pay restitution to additional victims who came forward after Troy and Amanda's arrests. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the choices I made, cooperating with the criminal prosecution, sending my own daughter to prison, using my inheritance to help her victims instead of securing my own comfort. I tell them about Linda's letter, about her belief that love sometimes means letting people face the consequences of their actions. I tell them about Mrs. Rodriguez working at 78 because criminals stole her retirement savings. I tell them about Amanda, who found her true calling by learning to help the kind of people she once victimized. And I tell them about the 200+ elderly people who've been protected from financial fraud because they attended one of Amanda's prevention workshops, learned to recognize the warning signs, and trusted their instincts when something seemed too good to be true. That's Linda's real legacy, not the money she moved or the trap she set, but the understanding that justice and forgiveness aren't opposites. Sometimes they're the same thing. If you're watching this and you've got family members who seem to have lost their way, remember that enabling bad behavior isn't the same as loving someone. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and let people face the results of their choices. And if you're an older person watching this, remember that staying safe from financial predators isn't about being suspicious of everyone. It's about being educated, asking the right questions, and trusting the people who've earned your trust through consistent actions over time. Thanks for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone out there make better choices than my daughter initially did, or better decisions than I almost made. Take care of yourselves, and take care of each other. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable someone's destructive choices, even when watching them face consequences breaks your heart, because real love prioritizes their character over their comfort. The difference between punishment and justice isn't the severity of consequences, but whether those consequences lead to redemption and protection for others who might be harmed by the same mistakes.